Welcome to Table Talk, a place to gather, guide, and go.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Table Talk, a place to gather, guide, and go. I'm joined by my co-host, Alyssa De Los Santos, and of course, I'm Jill Dobrowanski. We thank you for joining us and pulling up a chair to have a seat at our table again today. So you probably hear, Alyssa, I'm a little congested. And part of the reason is because spring is in full bloom here in New Jersey and the pollen is like off the charts. But that actually got me thinking about something that I kind of wanted to talk about today. And that's about transformation. Because, like what spring, it's like, it's coming out of that winter cocoon and everything's blooming and everything's budding. And, the world around me outside my window is transforming into this beautiful, lush green and full of colors. And so I kind of that got me thinking, because I know that one of the things that we as Christians in our walk with Jesus, in that sanctification process, in this journey, is that we are constantly being transformed. Because we're constantly being pouring into ourselves, we're serving others. And I was just listening to an interview, and the guest was saying that when we feed ourselves with biblical truths, with biblical knowledge, then there's no other place for that to go but outward. And I started thinking about that as far as transformations, and that's really what happens with all of us. But, and that's what transformation is. It's taking something old, making changes to it, and then becoming something new. And I was thinking of this because I'm one of those people, full confession, that changes my kitchen tablescape and decoration based upon the holiday, the season, all of that. And so I was taking off, the Valentine's Day, the St. Patrick's Day, all of that stuff this past week and putting it downstairs. And I was bringing up the summer stuff. And I was like, wow, it really just transforms my table. And it's very similar to kind of what we also do when we refinish something. So we're stripping it down and then we're making something new out of it. And there was something that you said during our pre-planning meeting that I wanted to kick off with. And that was, you said, what you aren't changing, you're choosing. Yeah. And so why don't we just begin by digging into that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great quote from the book Flooded by Nikki Koziarz. I can't ever remember how to say her last name. Sorry, Nikki. I have a similar issue. So do you. So we understand. But, when you really think about, we have the opportunity. Well, spring is new life. That's the whole visual representation. I love what you were saying about the seasons changing. And that's such a good picture of transformation. It's something new. And what we're not changing, we're choosing. That hits really, really close to home in terms of transformation. And, the definition that I wrote down of transformation is a thorough or dramatic change in form or appearance. And if you pause to think long enough, so many times we're longing for transformation, but the thorough or dramatic change requires work. Yeah. And I think it's easy for us to go into that feels too hard. And I can relate with that because, growing up, I had some, what we would now call traumatic childhood experiences. At the time, I would have not known to refer to it as such. It was my normal. And I chose to remain comfortably uncomfortable because going with what I knew felt safer in essence than what felt like, what appeared, the narrative, right? What I created was that this work of transformation was going to be way too painful. And so I chose just to remain comfortably uncomfortable. And I wonder how many times we do that. We just stay in the trauma or we stay in the old self because the prospect of the work that what we have to push through to get to transformation feels like too much. And the reality is what we're doing is we're either setting aside what needs to be done, or so we're pushing aside or we're pushing through. And I think, okay, pushing through is a momentary discomfort, really. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, it's a momentary discomfort. Pushing aside is a prolonged discomfort, right? Reaching into and toward the transformation, I don't know, it's not popular. It's also not pretty. And it's not Instagram worthy most of the time, because I think when I choose to step outside my comfort zone and work toward the healing, work toward the transformation, honestly, Jill, the reality is it makes people uncomfortable.
Yes.
Because our healing and our transformation, it just either impacts relationships, unhealthy relationships. If our relationship is unhealthy, then there's a loss of control in that unhealthy relationship when we begin to change. But in healthy relationships, even sometimes it won't make sense to the people around us. And I think we are so inclined. We were just talking about earlier, you and I, about the noise of the world. And how inclined we are to care about what other people think. I wrote this down too. Jill, it's not our commission to tend to our brokenness and then present ourselves as pleasing sacrifice. That's not what we were commissioned. We were invited to bring broken, unclean areas and present them to our Father. We bring those to the table.
Yes.
We don't wait to come, right? We don't wait to come until, oh goodness, I've got everything all fixed up and pretty. And we know that in our head, but sometimes I think it doesn't make it to our heart. And transformation, true transformation, would be a combination of head and heart healing, right? And sometimes we think choosing and reaching for more information. Do you know what I'm talking about? I've had seasons like this.
Yeah.
Where I was hoping for transformation based on head knowledge, and all I got was more information. I wasn't refined. I wasn't refreshed. I wasn't renewed. I just had more information because I think I was unwilling to let what was in my head also go into my heart. And I think for the thorough or dramatic change in form or appearance, I think it has to be head and heart. I think that's always going to be necessary. This other thing that I noticed about myself regarding transformation was that even in my relationship with the Lord, right? Like I was saved when I was 9, but I wasn't a fully committed follower of Christ at that point. And so I really wrestled. And what I noticed about myself as I aged, as I grew, both in maturity and also chronologically, I noticed that I had a quick response in my faith to serve and do. But I had this hesitancy to sit and be and receive. And some of that came because I had not yet transformed. I had learned as a child to not have needs. And so in order to not have needs, you just do. But transformation is going to require a pause so that we can be, right? Be still and know that I'm God. That's transformation.
Yes. Yeah. And the transformation like you're talking about is that long-term transformation. Mm-hmm. But there is also immediate transformation too at
True.
times. You can just, like a switch, change your mindset, oh, that's negative talk, self-talk, especially as women. We do that so often, right?
Don't we?
Yeah. Yes. Especially when you're listening to the noise like we were talking about.
For real.
But then you can make that decision to turn that off or turn it into something else. And it's like you have an immediate transformation in the way that you're thinking, from whether it's about yourself, whether it's about your family, your social media account, like whatever it is, you can have that. And when I think of that immediate transformation, I think of Lydia in the book of Acts. Here she was, we assume she was a successful woman. She owned her own business. She sold, the purples and the scarlet silk that we knew was, very high end and very royal. And here she is, she's out, at her shop one day in the square, and Paul is there, and he's come into the town, and she immediately was like, this is different. And like, she said, come to my home. She opened up her home for him, and she opened, it's not once, but twice, because then after he's released from prison and the miracle at the prison occurs, like he returns back to her home because her and her family, and it says here, I want to read it directly so that I don't misquote. It says, after she and her household were baptized, she urged us, if you consider me a believer in the Lord, come and stay at my house. And she persuaded us. So it was like, it was that immediate transformation. You know, the Lord opened her heart, it says, in that one moment. And we have those interactions with people where that they can transform us immediately. But like you were saying, you know, and those are good. But it's also, like you were saying, it's that long-term transformation, that hard work.
Yeah.
You know, I also think about myself, you know, like anybody who knew me in high school, if they know me now, they see almost two totally different people.
Yeah.
Because I've transformed into walking into being a follower and believer of Christ, but then walking alongside my faith and digging deeper and healing past wounds, like you were talking about. And it's just, I am a different person. But again, hard work, ugly work. Like you said, it's not pretty.
No.
And, you know, something else you said too is you have to accept the fact that you could lose relationships along the way. And that may not be a bad thing.
True. I think it's perceived as a bad thing. We don't like loss. I think our human nature is inclined to think all loss is bad. I mean, I have to own that myself, but also you're a different person than you were in high school. And sometimes the hard work of transformation, Jill, is that when we are back in that arena, so it's easy to be different when we're separated from those who knew us one way. But when we re-enter that arena, sometimes I'm surprised at how difficult that can be for me as well. Like, is it okay for me to be something different? And that goes back to some of my trauma of needing to know that it was okay, because I didn't know I was okay. And that can be sometimes added to the hard work of transformation is, you can do all the grit and grinding, right? The non-glamorous work of transformation. I mean, in the middle of it, it's not glamorous, right? We know that the end result is holy, really. It's a holy space. But you could do all the grit and all that behind the scene and then still wonder if people will receive you. Will they receive the renewed you? Will they receive, because if there's a dramatic change, like you said, makes people uncomfortable. You might lose relationships, and we have to be okay with that.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's tricky.
Yeah. And it's also too, like kind of what we were alluding to before, is that it's also, you know, we like to count. We like to put a number on ourselves. Whereas, okay, I have this many followers. I have this many friends. Look at how big my circle is. Look at, you know, this platform that I can influence on. But really, when it comes down to it, it's about that one relationship that we have. And it's the relationship in which our hearts and minds are called to be transformed and to be renewed by. And that's the one that we always, when we're going through that process, that hard work, that we have to always try to remind ourselves of and to keep our focus on that.
So true. You know, in terms of prolonged transformation, most of us, I think, right, we're inclined, we want the immediate transformation. Like I remember, being saved and then kind of trying to go through the work of sanctification, which is hard also. You know, it's like the holy sandpaper. It just, I don't think when you're being refined, like if you're an inanimate object, the sandpaper, there's no feeling there, but I'm human. And so like, I know when that holy sandpaper is trying to grind off a rough edge, and And so sanctification is not easy either. So what we're talking about is just hard work, period, right? Not just to be transformed, but then to continue to be sanctified, continue to be made in his likeness. There's some vulnerability that's required there. But I was thinking about, the woman with the issue of blood, which we have talked about previously in a previous episode, and how, 12 years, scripture is very clear in Mark 5 that for 12 years she had been suffering. That's like a lot of days. And that's a lot of desiring to be different. And one thing that really sticks out to me with regards to her, so there was this prolonged transformation because she spent 12 years trying to figure it out on her own. I've done that. She spent 12 years like investing in other things that might make you feel better. I've also done that, right? Because no amount of trips to the gym have been the thing that has transformed me, right? But I've tried. And of course, exercise is healthy and good. That's not my point. My point is we can go to the things, right, that won't bring the work. But she chose a better story. But in order for her to choose a better story, she chose a dangerous one. Yes. She went into that crowd and exposed a lot of clean people to her uncleanliness. And, just thinking about her, like, she reminds me a couple things. Number one, we have the option to choose a better story. Transformation is choosing a better story. And it may be that there are some sad chapters to get to that, but like hers, could be 12 years. It could be this prolonged sense of transformation. But, my transformation was prolonged by my hesitation. And I think that's how I relate with her. I think her transformation was prolonged by her hesitation, but very clearly in Mark 5, I'm going to read this as well. In verse 27, it says, when she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak, because she thought, if I just touch his clothes, I will be healed. Immediately, which I love that word. Immediately her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering. At once, Jesus realized that power had gone out from him. He turned around in the crowd and asked, who touched my clothes? And what I love about that even was like, it was a crowd. He turned toward her. This is the process of transformation, right? She reaches for him. He turns toward her and says, who touched me? Because he wanted to have an intimate interaction with her. And it says in verse 31, that the disciples say, you see the crowd, like, how can you ask who touched me? And in 32, but Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. Then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet, trembling with fear, and told the whole truth. He said to her, daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering. And this was prolonged, and then yet it was immediate. Yeah. Right. So we prolong what he wants to do in the right now. It's us. It's not that I don't think that the transformation itself takes a long time, although my refining, my sanctification has taken a long time. There were days after I was saved where I just woke up thinking like, why do I still do this? I don't want to do this anymore. But that's not because I hadn't been transformed. It was because I was still in process. And we want the finished product, right? And we're inclined in our society to see the pretty and the finished product. But the reality is our life, our journey of faith is not about a finished product. It's a process. And if we could just get comfortable, not in the discomfort, like I was comfortably uncomfortable. No. If we can get comfortable in our faith, because that's what it says here, your faith, daughter, your faith has healed you. And if we can allow the process to be uncomfortable, believing that the end result is everything we're angling for here in this life, I think that really matters. I think we can choose a better story. I think we can prolong the transformation, or we can choose a better story and go, I'm going to take a risk here. I'm going to do this dangerous thing. And I think it is dangerous, as I was talking about earlier. I think it's dangerous to be filled with head knowledge and not ever let it penetrate the heart. Have you ever met people like that? Have you been a person like that? I have.
Yeah.
I can tell you all the things, but the fruit of my life doesn't look like I believe what I'm saying. And that's embarrassing. But it's part of the process.
It is. And it's also part of the, like you were saying, and I automatically thought to, as believers, as followers of Christ, we are called to be more Christ-like and walk in our faith and allow what's filling us up to be exposed, because that's where the glory and the glory of grace shines through us. And that's what we have to see, even when we're in the middle of it, even when it's not glamorous, even when we're at our most vulnerable, even though we may not show our vulnerability to the entire world, God knows it. And he sees it when we're with ourselves and when we're with him.
Yeah. Right. If we reach for him.
Yes.
Transformation, I think this illustrates it so beautifully. Transformation is making a decision to posture ourselves in his direction, in the Lord's direction, to reach for him because he's there. And I love that it says that scripture is very clear that he felt the power go out from him. That's transformation. And we don't do that work. He does. And I think we're inclined, right? We're inclined to think, well, if I want to choose a better story, the work is up to me. Actually, it's one decision that's up to us. It was one decision that was up to her. The one decision to say, I've tried all these things, now I'm going to try something different. Faith. It's exactly what you're saying. And I have a friend who's a coach, a life coach, and she talks about the difference between a tension in our lives that we want to fix, or a tension in our life that we just need to manage. And I think transformation is often a tension that we just need to manage, right? But I think our inclination is that anything that causes tension for us, I think our inclination is to fix it, right? We just want to get out of the discomfort. We just want to make it better because we feel like then life is improved. But how many lessons have you learned in the middle, Jill?
Oh, so many to count.
Right?
Yeah.
Mostly my lessons were in the middle. And how often we miss the depth of healing because we choose to either push aside instead of push through, or we choose to fix something that really we're just needing to manage the tension for a little while. In fact, scripture's clear. Like while you're going to suffer for a little while, like take heart, like this is going to produce something that's greater than what you can imagine. So I don't want to push it aside anymore.
Yeah. And when you were talking, I was also thinking about the other thing that we have a tendency to want to do is, especially if it's a more serious traumatic event, is to forget it. Just push it back, bury it deep in the memory so that you never have to face it, but it's always still there in that little closet. In psychology, we used to call it putting it in a closet. And so, I think about that too, that other piece. And I'm sure you went through that too, because trust me, there's plenty of things I wish I could forget, but we're not called to.
Right. And the remembering reminds us of our deep need.
Yeah. And it's also a practice in surrender.
Absolutely.
Because if we can't truly, and it's not a matter of just giving up or getting over something, it's a matter of truly surrendering it. And that's where the faith comes in.
Right. I heard a pastor from the Northwest tell a story of being at the beach. And he and his wife were kind of far way off, and the children were in the ocean. and they were desperate to, I can't remember if it was a starfish, but something type of shell that they were really angling for. And they watched one of their children as the child kind of went underwater and came up, and you could like see the frustration on the child, like it was visible. And so at some point, the father goes out and is like, what's going on? And he realizes that his son has all these broken pieces in his hands. And his frustration is he's seen something that he wants and he's going to try to get it, but he can't because he won't let go of what's in his hands. And I think this is what keeps us from true transformation. And we don't often know, like we're clutching all the broken things. We're clutching all the things that we failed, all the things that we want better, all the things that we love sometimes. But until we'll open our hands to be able to get the wholeness, transformation is about pursuing wholeness. And until we're willing to let go of all the shards, all the broken dreams, all the broken desires, all of it, we can't grab the whole thing until we get rid of the broken things. And we are so inclined emotionally toward our broken things.
Mm.
But there's where faith comes in again, right, Jill? Like we have to have faith to let go of it, to believe that something better is coming in transformation.
Yeah. That reminds me, I think maybe 2 months ago, I think it was, we talked about the man with the crippled hand. And what did Jesus say? Open your hand.
Yeah. Stretch it out to me.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And then we talked about that's exactly what he did up on that cross. He opened up his hands and his arms for us.
Yeah. What a beautiful picture to keep in mind when we're unwilling, when we're holding things close to our chest, when we're afraid, right? Yes. Fear is what drives many of my decisions. You have an opportunity to make a decision in fear or a decision in love. Mm. And I want to, in transformation, I think we make decisions out of love, not out of fear.
Yes.
Well, that's some work, isn't it? That's some work.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But so worth it.
Yeah.
So worth it. And the reminder too is that it's always ongoing. Because like you said, there's going to be moments where you're like, you just kind of want to fall back into that comfortable uncomfortableness. Mm-hmm. But the work is that we have to keep moving and keep going. And, like you said, we will see the trueness of that healing on the day that we're called home. And we're told, welcome, good and faithful servant,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good. It motivates the transformation. It makes it worth it, even though it's scary. Because I think, can we just like put that on the table? It's scary. Yeah. It's hard.
Yeah. And some of the things we talked about before too is that you don't always have to do it alone. You're not expected to do it alone. And there's nothing wrong with getting help to do it.
Right.
If that looks like going to your pastor, if that looks like joining a support group, if that looks like one-on-one counseling, there is nothing to be ashamed about when you're doing that, because that's part of your process that you need in order to transform.
Mm-hmm. And I do think our story becomes a lighthouse. I do think our story, it's why we have to come to the table. It's why we have to be honest. And I'm not talking about like airing every single piece of dirty laundry that you have or skeleton in the closet. I'm talking about being honest about your transformation, being honest about our deep need for the Lord and what he does in the middle of saying, I have a great need for you. I can't figure this out. I've tried. And so far I'm doing a horrible job. Mm-hmm. Right. But I think it's true. So go back to the woman in Mark 5. Where was she healed? She was healed in a crowd.
At the foot of Jesus.
And think about this, with a lot of people around, right? She had been isolated for so very long. And I think the reality is when we come to the table, when we share our healing with others, see, the opposite of transformation, I think, is isolation. Mm. And she was isolated. And so she didn't have this great change in her life until she moved out into the crowd, until she was willing to be vulnerable really with her story, because it was dangerous. Frankly, it was dangerous what she did. But also, I think if trauma typically happens within the context of relationship, intimate relationships, healing will happen in the context of intimate relationships, both with the Father and with others.
Mm.
And so when we come to the table, Jill, we come to the table in different ways, right? And sometimes we come, we've talked about this before, and we don't eat at all. We listen and we receive and we're nourished, but we never eat or we never share.
Yeah.
And sometimes we come to the table in fear and we're hiding, but we're still coming to the table. Okay, those are all worthy. Those are all good things. And sometimes we come and then we begin to open up and we share our process. But I think it doesn't matter if you're coming to the table as someone who's a fringe. Maybe you're on the fringe of your faith. And maybe you decide, I'm going to come to the table one more time because I've tried all these things and I'm weary, but I'm going to come one more time because there's a little part of me that still has hope. And if we set the table, if we show up, if we make room, what if that's the life-giving conversation when we choose to talk about our transformation? What if our obedience is someone else's life-giving conversation?
Yeah.
Right. And we don't show up in hopes of that, but that is the power of transformation. But I think we have to be honest. And I really think this month we should spend time really reflecting. How am I showing up to the table?
Yeah.
How am I showing up to the table? Am I in a season where I'm not sharing anything? Am I in a season where I'm unwilling to show up? Can I show up? Can I make a decision this month alone to come in and no longer to step out of isolation? And I think a step out of isolation is a step toward transformation.
Yeah. And I think too, it doesn't matter how you come to the table. There's times where I could go running to the table. There's times where I'm just going to walk and take my time and kind of leisurely stroll to it. And then there's times where I'm barely able to crawl to get myself in a seat.
Yeah. Do you remember me telling you about my son's first day in kindergarten? I can't remember if I shared this in a previous episode, but he was not a big fan of school. It's funny because I'm a teacher and God's humor. And when I went to pick him up, his principal was a principal I had previously taught for, and she met me on the sidewalk and she said, listen, he had a great day. He was only under the table for, a few hours. And I was like, oh, he was under the table. Mm-hmm. But then Grace, the therapy dog, came in and Grace got under the table with him. And she said, Grace put her paw on top of Andrew's hand and he wouldn't look at Grace. He would just kind of side-eye Grace. But eventually, my son and Grace came out from under the table and sat with the rest of the kids. It doesn't matter how we're at the table, because the reality is Grace is there. Grace is there to say, Emma, go ahead. It's okay. I'm going to sit with you under the table. Yeah. But the nourishment is at the table. It's why the table is so symbolic in Scripture. Oh. And you're right. Doesn't matter. Sometimes I'm going to be under the table.
I love that story. Oh, I'm getting all teary-eyed just thinking about it.
Right?
As an educator, we understand that. And as a mama, you want to.
Oh, right. What a beautiful picture God gave me that day to say, remember my grace, Alyssa.
Yes.
Remember how my grace comes and sits beside you and puts a loving embrace on top of you and gives me space to go through the process. Grace gives me space to go through the process.
Yes. Yeah. And it gives you the time.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah, me too.
So powerful.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Before I start bawling.
Right.
You want to leave us with our go for this month?
Yeah. Yeah. I just think I want us to just be reflective. I just want us to consider how we're coming to the table. Are we coming to the table? How are we being transformed? And are we willing to be transformed? Are we willing to let go of the pieces we're holding in our hands so that wholeness can be ours? Are we willing to spend a little time thinking about, what am I believing? Because it's true that our thoughts become beliefs, and our beliefs become actions, and our actions impact our behavior, but we got to take it all the way back. And I think we would do well just this month to ponder transformation, to be formed differently, to be changed dramatically. If we just ponder that, to think, how are my thoughts driving my decisions? What am I believing about transformation? What should I believe about transformation? What's the evidence in scripture of transformation? Am I prolonging something? Have I pushed something aside that I need to push through? I think, Jill, we would be wise to be silent with ourselves and to ask ourselves, is there something that I'm choosing because I'm unwilling to change?
Yeah. Very good.
Yeah.
And I think it's something that we can do regularly. It's
sure.
not a one-time thing either.
I agree. Sanctification is ongoing, so why not be reflective in an ongoing state and be honest with ourselves?
Yeah. Yes. And honest with God, because he knows. He already knows.
It's already there.
Again, you got to get it from your head to your heart.
Yeah. My hope is that we remember this month that we have the option. We can choose a better story.
Yes.
We don't have to do the work in the better story. We have to surrender for the better story. And I hope, I pray that we can ponder that. And listen, friends, if there's encouragement that you need, there's a question that you have, well, bring that to the table.
Yeah.
Shoot us a message. Let us know. This is hard. Transformation is hard work, and it's easy to quit in the middle. So we want to support each other, right? I mean, that's what we're here for. So if you're someone who's been just crawling under the table and you're desperate to know that grace exists where you are, reach out. Or just reach out. Instead of looking at others when God is so near, let's just point each other back to the truth that grace is present and that God is pleased with his people.
I love it. I love it. Oh, so good. So good. Another great chat.
Yeah. Ooh, I'm stretched. I'm stretched.
I know. Well, once again, we welcome and invite anybody to our table. And again, like Alyssa said, if you need some support, reach out. We're here. And again, it doesn't have to be public and sharing everything to everybody, like you said. It could just be between you and I, and that's it.
Just between friends.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I love it.
Well,
everybody, thank you again for tuning in for another episode of Table Talk, a place to gather, guide, and go. And we hope you have a blessed month. And also don't forget, share the episode and click the subscribe so you never miss another Table Talk. And don't forget to pull up a seat at our table.
Yeah.